Hey everyone, today I'm going to share an absolutely busted build that I've been using ever since Arc 3.0, which straight up carried me through solo flawless Spire of the Watcher. Well, there's not too much time left to enjoy this build with Lightfall around the corner. I figure, hey, why not enjoy it while it's still here? And I could put my own 2 cents on the whole Arc Hunter roly-poly build that's way too much fun. Without further ado, let's get right into it. First up, I want to talk about the subclass. Starting off, for those of you who don't know, this build revolves around 2 abilities that work in tandem together to make an infinite loop, the first being Combination Blow. To sum it up, Combination Blow is a melee that gives you a stacking buff called Combination Blow, and a small amount of health on kill. The buff grants you increased melee damage for 20 seconds that can stack up to 3 times and completely refresh your class's ability. It's the gift that keeps on giving. Which is where our second ability comes in, Gambler's Dodge, which says when you dodge near an enemy, you get your melee back. When paired with Combination Blow, this creates an infinite loop of dodge melee that doesn't stop. It is worth mentioning that when you hit Combination Blow times 3 with this loop, your melee turns into a 1-inch punch that hits like a train. This quickly degenerates into you turning into a somersaulting demon that punches your way through everything, which sounds a whole lot like the Titan Fantasy, but on Hunter. As for the other abilities, I use Triple Jump as my jump, just because that's the Hunter standard. And as for the grenade, I use Pulse Grenade, but really use whatever you like using here. It doesn't matter a whole lot. Even with our infinite loop in mind, it doesn't stop there because now we're moving on to our aspects, where everything gets real spicy. First up, we have Flow State, which is real simple. Defeating a jolted target makes you amplified. While amplified, you take less damage while dodging, and recharges faster. Which is nice considering we dodge all the time. So if you mess up a dodge timing, most likely because you've already killed everything, you get that increased dodge recharge. Moving on, we have our second aspect, Lethal Current. After you dodge, your next melee gains increased lunge range and additionally jolts the target, which is nice, because after you delete a jolted enemy, you will become amplified, meaning you're basically always amplified and jolting literally everything with our infinite loop of dodge melee. Also, the icing on the cake that no one talks about is that damaging a jolted enemy with a melee will blind them. Which is nice because anything that you don't delete in one punch not only is jolted, but can't fight back, which is especially nice for champions. Next, I want to talk about the super. In Arcstrider, we have 2 options, Gathering Storm and the bad one in PvE. I would recommend using Gathering Storm because it is actually insane and has one of the most satisfying noises in Destiny 2. Next we have the fragments. Everything here is really designed to add to the subclass in some brutal and unfair ways. First up, we have the Spark of Resistance, which is an incredible defensive option as it provides additional resistance while surrounded by enemies. This makes you even tankier in a build that is very much in the face of enemies literally all the time. So the extra resistance is something that I would personally never take off. Next we have the Spark of Ions, where defeating a jolted target spawns an ionic trace, which is a little string of arc energy that tracks to you and gives you ability energy. And while our grenade is really the only thing that ever goes on cooldown, it's really nice to have. Next we have the Spark of Shock, which makes our grenades jolt targets, which makes me feel that this is now a good time to bring up Jolt. When an enemy is jolted, they take additional extra damage from arc sources. As they continue to take damage, they spread chain lightning to everything. And while our melee is always jolting, our grenade does too, which turns the Pulse Grenade into a monster for clearing groups. Lastly, we have our Flex slot. Anything past the prior 3 aspects is pure overkill, so I choose to run Spark of Amplitude. This aspect allows you to spawn an Orb of Power while amplified, which we are pretty much always amplified. To be honest, there are better aspects to equip here, but hey, I like using Gathering Storm as much as possible so I can hear that super sweet sound. As for other good options, I could recommend Spark of Magnitude for longer grenade times, or Spark of Feedback to punch even harder when an enemy punches you. And that's it for the subclass, so let's get moving straight on to the armor and mods. For the helmet mods, the 2 essential mods are going to be the Well of Ions and Hands On. Well of Ions, whenever you pick up an Arc Elemental Well, you hit harder with your next Arc melee ability, make the melee damage number go up and the dopamine. After that, we do have Hands On to give you super energy every time you get a melee kill, which we are doing a lot. Moving on to the arms mods that are really important, we have Impact Induction, which gives us grenade energy every time we cause damage with a melee attack, and either Font of Might or Font of Wisdom. Font of Might is nice because you get that 25% damage increase if you're using arc weapons as well, or Font of Wisdom is also really nice because you have the opportunity to cast Gathering Storm more. As for a chest piece, I really like to run resistance mods in whatever relevant content I'm in because we're always point blank to enemies. As for the combat style mod, I put Melee Wellmaker here so we can get those arc elemental wells whenever we need. Next up, we have the boots. I have a recuperation mod which gives health when you pick up an orb of power, which synergizes with the spark of amplitude I use. Next, we have elemental ordnance, which gives us 2 arc wells whenever we get a kill with our grenade, which is extremely lethal with all of our aspects. And we already throw a lot due to the amount of wells and ionic traces that we spawn. Lastly, we have our class item, which has 2 really important mods. The first is Bomber, which gives us grenade energy every time we dodge, leaning even more into grenades. And then we have Bountiful Wells, which gives us 2 arc elemental wells every time we make a single well, which leads into more ability uptime and feeds into our chosen Font of Might or Wisdom. Next, we'll have our exotic armor slot, which for a build like this, we have 2 schools of thought. We have the Assassin's Cowl, which every time you get a melee kill or a finisher, you become invisible for a few seconds and a chunk of health back that usually will heal you to full after every melee in tandem with Combination Blow. With this build, Cowl gives an unbelievable survivability and is definitely the stronger of the 2 options. If Godhood doesn't suit you, we have the Liar's Handshake, which gives you the exotic perk Cross Counter, which allows you to punch harder when you use your melee or are hit by a melee. This also heals you. What this provides is the ability to punch any enemy of any size, virtually guaranteeing that you can straight face tank the biggest guy in the room while dealing more damage in return. I personally use this one as I find it more fun as Godhood doesn't fit my fancy. Moving on to stats, there's not too much to talk about, but 100 resilience is a must, especially if you're rolling with Liar's Handshake. That extra 40% damage resistance comes in clutch all the time. Secondary, I would recommend Discipline, as strength and intellect don't really matter too much for this build. Third, I would recommend Mobility, as that allows you to jump higher and helps for not looking like a goober in jumping puzzles. Or you can be like me and roll with 28 Mobility, get called a Fake Hunter, and then just equip the Stompies when you need to jump. Lastly, onto the weapons. For my primary, I will always use a shotgun with 1-2 punch. Personally, I use the Wastelander M5 from the Dares of Eternity, but if that's not your speed, you can also use a Found Verdict or Without Remorse. Either should do just fine. 1-2 punch is just a perk that says if you hit with all shotgun pellets, melee do more damage, and then brain get dopamine from number go up. Next, as for the secondary weapon, I usually like to use something with Volt Shot on it. Basically any gun will do, Brigand's Law, Tarnished Metal, but what's really the talk of the town nowadays is the Ikelos SMG. That thing is 10 out of 10, I would recommend if you still need one. Although, it is worth saying I have been recently using the Path of Least Resistance, and it's really good! And trace rifles are really good, and nobody uses them, which I'll probably talk about a little bit later, but anything with Volt Shot will really do. Lastly, we'll have our power weapon. I can always recommend Storm Chaser if you have a good one, unlike myself, but if you're looking for other stuff, I usually find that I have a lot of success with things such as the Lament, Galahorn, of course, Grand Overture, which is not one you typically hear a whole lot of, and then realistically any linear fusion rifle of your choice, for this season at least. And that's it for the weapons, but I did want to move on to some things that might be helpful, kinda like a play-by-play. Some things to remember, at least while you're using this build, is if you get a kill with your jolt from the melee and not the melee itself, it will not refresh your dodge, meaning that you're going to have to punch something without the jolting effect. This can be especially lethal in higher end content when you need to refresh your dodge. So, always try to keep that one in mind. Next, don't hit exploding enemies, especially in the more lethal content. Things like Supplicants, Squeebs, Thralls, Exploder Shanks, those are gonna make you have a bad time. This is where your gun comes in. Believe it or not, no matter how much I harp about the melee, sometimes the bullet is stronger than the fist. As for everything else, make sure you pick up your Arc Elemental Wells, as they make your melee deal a lot more damage and can charge your super or make your gun do more damage based off of the font of whatever you took. And I really hope you guys found some of this video at least informational. I know that this build is a pretty popular one in Destiny 2. However, I do hope I was able to help bring something new to the table. Regardless, I really hope you do get to try it, since Bungie did give every player the mods in their current state, and hopefully, fingers crossed, it doesn't go away in Lightfall. But in case it does, please give this one a try. You guys are going to love it. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, feel free to like and subscribe. It would mean a whole lot to me, and see you guys next time.